The snow fell thick over Winterfell that day, quieting the world in white as Robb Stark stared down at the courtyard, his hands clenched behind his back. War had taken much from him, his father, his sisters, his home, and now it threatened to take his sense. Theon Greyjoy stood below, a prisoner, though no chains bound his hands. There had been long debates among the northern lords. Many urged Robb to send Theon back to his father as a diplomatic gesture. Others warned it was foolish to trust a Greyjoy. Robb's mother, Catelyn, had spoken plainly. "He's a boy taken from his home, but not your brother. Remember that." But Robb remembered the nights they laughed together. He remembered training in the yard with Theon, the taunts and smirks, the arrogance, but also the loyalty. Yet something deeper stirred in him. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was the ghost of Ned Stark whispering in his blood. But Robb Stark, king in the north, made a choice that would change the war. "He stays," Robb declared at last, turning to the gathered lords in his hall. "He's Greyjoy by blood, but he's been a ward of my father since he was 10. If he's truly loyal to us, let him prove it." There was grumbling, of course. Lord Karstark scowled and muttered under his breath. Roose Bolton remained unreadable, as always, his pale eyes like still water hiding something underneath. But Robb was king, and none challenged him openly. Theon was summoned before the king, and he came with his usual smirk, though his eyes flicked nervously at the men around him. "What's this, then? Have I earned my head today, or just another sermon on loyalty?" "You're not leaving Winterfell," Robb said simply. "You'll remain here, a guest or a prisoner, depending on how you behave." The smirk faltered, just a little. "Not returning to the Iron Islands?" "No. What about my father?" "He can rot in his salt throne until the sea takes him," Robb said coldly. "You'll stay. If you want to be a Stark, prove it." For the first time, Theon didn't have a smart reply. He looked away, jaw tight. There was a storm behind his eyes, one that even he couldn't name. All he said was, "Very well, Your Grace." Time passed. Theon remained in Winterfell, treated civilly but watched closely. He joined the training sessions again, rode with the men, ate at the long table beside Robb. But whispers never stopped. Some called him a traitor in waiting. Others mocked him behind his back, called him the drowned wolf. He tried to laugh it off. He flirted with servant girls, joked loudly in the halls, gambled in the corner with the squires, but something had changed. He'd been allowed to live, but not to belong. And in the cold halls of Winterfell, that was worse than chains. One night, drunk on northern ale, and tired of being stared at like a dog in a cage, Theon lashed out. "Why am I still here?" He shouted at Robb in the quiet of the Godswood. "Why not send me home, or kill me outright?" Robb looked at him calmly, his face older than his years. "Because I still believe you're not like your father." "I am his son," Theon snapped. "Do you think that doesn't mean something?" "He will come for me one day. Let him come," Robb said. "If he takes you by force, you'll know where your loyalty truly lies. Until then, prove I was right to spare you." Theon was silent for a long time. "You trust me, even now?" "I trust no one completely, but I still hope." It was not the answer Theon wanted, but it was honest, and it sank deeper into his bones than anything had before. Far to the west, Balon Greyjoy plotted and prepared, his ravens flying and his banners rising. He had not heard from his son in moons, and he assumed the worst. But Balon Greyjoy never mourned not unless it gave him power. In his silence he read betrayal, and that was enough. Meanwhile, in the north, Theon Greyjoy stayed under the same roof as those who watched him closely and trusted him little. He walked the same halls he had grown up in, but now he was a stranger, a ghost of a past never claimed. He thought of the Iron Islands, of cold salt winds and his father's scowl. He thought of Asha, his sister, and the sneer she wore like armor. And then he thought of Robb, the brother who had chosen to show him mercy. The war was changing. And so was Theon Greyjoy. The raven came with the first warning. Balon, Greyjoy had not remained idle in Pike. Though Theon's silence had offended him, deeply wounded his pride, more than he would admit, he took it as proof of weakness, not rebellion. In the salt-stained halls of the Iron Islands, Balon declared that the North was vulnerable, distracted by Robb's war with the Lannisters. His plan was swift and brutal: strike the coast, seize the castles near the sea, and take the North Fort. The drowned god while the boy king marched south. And without Theon to speak for them, the Greyjoys would come as enemies, not estranged kin. The raven that reached Robb bore grim news. Deepwood Motte had fallen. Torrhen Square was under siege. The Ironburn had returned to the mainland in full force, and they came not as raiders, but conquerors. Robb stood in the war tent that night, fists clenched at his sides. The flickering torchlight danced across the faces of his bannermen. Lord Umber was livid. Karstark wanted blood. Even Roose Bolton, ever calm and measured, advised immediate retaliation. But it was Catelyn who voiced the unspoken question. Did Theon know? All eyes turned to the man sitting silently in the corner, wine untouched before him. Theon didn't meet their gaze. "I've sent no letters," he said. "You watch my every move, remember? I'm not a traitor." "That's not what I asked," Catelyn said. "I didn't know," Theon replied. He looked at Robb now, eyes hard. "You think I'd warn you? Tell you my father's secrets after you kept me chained by silence in your frozen castle?" "You're not chained," Robb said. "Aren't I?" Theon snapped. "I can't leave. I'm not trusted. I'm not Ironborn anymore, but I'll never be Stark." The tent fell silent again, the air heavy. "He's your prisoner," Lord Karstark said bitterly. "If his people bring war, we should send him back in pieces." Robb said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "He stays. But he's no longer a guest." And so Theon was locked in the cellars beneath Winterfell, deep under stone and snow. Not tortured, not starved, but forgotten. No voice but the rats. No warmth but the flicker of the torch when the guard passed. He sat in the dark and thought. About choices. About who he was. About what he had become. He wanted to hate Robb. He wanted to scream betrayal. But deep inside, another voice whispered, "You did this to yourself, Dot." In the weeks that followed, Robb sent forces to the western shores. It was a slow, bitter fight. The Ironborn were ferocious, used to the sea, the cliffs, the surprise raids. Without Theon's insight, the North bled more men than it should have. But Robb refused to bring Theon back into council, not even when the reports grew darker. Asha, Greyjoy had taken Deepwood Motte completely. Dagmar Cleftjaw raided villages all along the coast. And worse, Balon Greyjoy had sent his youngest son, Aeron, to push inland. Still Theon sat in the dark. It was Maester Luwine who visited him one night. The old man carried a lantern and a quiet sadness on his face. He sat on the stone bench without invitation and studied Theon for a while. "You were once a boy who dreamed of ruling Pike," Luwine said softly. "Do you still dream that?" Theon didn't reply. "I taught you letters, remember? You hated it." "I remember," Theon said. "I hated everything here. The gods, the cold, the quiet. I wanted the salt wind, the smell of the sea. And yet here you sit," Luwine said, "while your kin burn your home." The words hit harder than expected. Theon looked at the lantern. The light shimmered like flame on his pale face. "Why are you here?" "To ask you a question," Luwine said. Would you rather be your father's son and drown with him, or be the man Robb believed you could be? Theon didn't speak. He stared at the stone wall, heart pounding with something he didn't recognize. Shame. Robb, meanwhile, began to see the cracks in his kingdom. The Karstarks grew restless. The northern lords whispered about weakness. His trust in Theon became a sore tooth they could not stop poking at. And yet, in all his thoughts, Robb still remembered the boy who had stood by his side. He remembered the laughter, the swordplay, the shared rage when Ned was taken. The war, with the Lannisters burned in the south. But the north was bleeding from within Dot, and in the darkness beneath Winterfell, Theon Greyjoy began to wonder for the first time in his life who he truly was. The night the snows began to fall again, Robb Stark stood alone in the crypts beneath Winterfell, staring at the stone likeness of his father. The flickering torch in his hand cast lone shadows across the silent tombs. The wind howled above, a low, mournful sound that made the dead feel close. Robb wasn't sure what had drawn him down here. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe the weight of the crown. Or maybe the silence helped him think. He tried to be his father's son, tried to lead with honor, but every choice seemed to carry blood in its wake. Keeping Theon had brought the Ironborn's wrath. Trusting men like Karstark had brought whispers of betrayal. Even his victories against the Lannisters felt like hollow triumphs. For every inch of ground won, another piece of him seemed lost. You would have known what to do. He whispered to the cold stone face of Ned Stark. Wouldn't you? But no answer came from the dead Dot above. Winterfell was restless. Word had spread that the Ironborn had taken Barrowton. Small folk fled toward the heart of the north, terrified, and the lords were beginning to turn. Some thought Robb's campaign in the south had distracted him from his own lands. Others believed he had grown too sentimental, especially over Theon. Roose Bolton came to him that morning. "My lord," he said in his usual quiet, dead-eyed tone, "you know I've never questioned your decisions in public. But you question them in private," Robb said without looking up from the map. Roose didn't deny it. "I merely wonder how long we will continue to bleed for a boy who may yet betray us." "He's not a boy anymore," Robb said. "He's a man without a country. He has no one but us." "Men like that are dangerous," Roose murmured. Robb narrowed his eyes. "So are men who speak softly and hide knives behind smiles." There was a pause. Then Roose bowed slightly. "As you say, your grace." Later that day, as the snow thickened, Robb did something he hadn't done in weeks. He visited Theon in the dungeons. Theon looked thinner, his skin pale, his beard grown in patches. His eyes were dull, but still sharp enough to show he hadn't broken. "Not yet. You look like shit," Robb muttered as he stepped inside. "You came all this way to compliment me?" Theon rasped, half smiling. "I came to ask you something," Robb said, leaning against the cold wall. Theon raised a brow. "Not going to lecture me? Not going to demand loyalty while holding me in chains?" "I'm done demanding," Robb said. "If you're going to help me, you'll do it because you want to. Because you still remember what we were." Silence stretched between them for a moment. "I know what your father wants," Robb continued. "He doesn't want just land. He wants a legacy. He wants to break the North from the inside out. If I let him, every house in the North will fall, and the Lannisters won't even need to raise a sword. The realm will be split. And what do you want me to do about it?" Theon asked bitterly. "Go crawling back to Pike? You think they'll listen to me? They think I'm a Stark pet." "They'll listen," Robb said, "because I'll send you as my envoy, my prisoner, my warning." Theon stared at him. "You want to trade me to my father?" "No," Robb said calmly. "I want you to talk to him, to stand before him and tell him what he's destroying. Maybe he'll listen. Maybe he won't. but I'd rather give you a chance to stop this war than let it burn on without trying." Theon laughed, hollow and rough. "You want me to beg for peace from a man who drowned me in silence for 10 years? "No," Robb said again. "I want you to be better than him." There was no reply this time. Just quiet. That night, Theon lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The rats had stopped scurrying. The cold was biting. And for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of a choice he couldn't laugh off or drink away. He could remain here, in chains, and rot slowly into nothing. Or he could go back to the Iron Islands and face the father who had never loved him, face the truth, face the blood he was born into. The next morning, when the guard opened the door, Theon stood waiting. "Take me to the king," he said. Outside, the snow fell harder, and war drew closer. The hall was cold as iron and filled with the muted grumblings of skeptical lords when Theon Greyjoy was brought before the council. He no longer wore the furs of Winterfell or the loose finery of a nobleman. His clothes were plain, his hair still unkempt, his body marked with the quiet wear of imprisonment. But he stood tall, taller than most expected, and for once he didn't. Robb sat at the head of the table, his crown resting beside him rather than on his head, a quiet message. This was not a king commanding. This was a brother pleading. "Theon Greyjoy has agreed to serve as envoy," Robb announced. "He will go to Pike and speak with Balon. He'll offer terms." "Terms?" Lord Karstark barked. "Why not send him with a blade through his throat? His father's ships are drowning our coastlines." Theon didn't flinch. "If you think I enjoy the idea of crawling back to him, you're wrong. But he's my father, whether I want him to be or not. And he listens only to strength. If I can make him see that Robb has the North united behind him, maybe he won't gut you and send your head back in a box," Bolton cut in. Theon looked at him. "He might. But he won't ignore me. Not entirely." "You overestimate your value," Roose said flatly. Theon smirked, but there was no humor in it. "No, I just understand the man you want to beat. You don't." Robb let the tension hang for a moment. Then, quietly, he said, "He'll leave within the week. With a small escort, under the banner of peace." "A small escort?" Karstark muttered. "You're sending him to his death." "Then let him die trying to prevent war," Robb said. Voice like steel. "If he succeeds, we gain the coast. If he fails, we lose a man who already has nothing left." The lords murmured. Some nodded. Others didn't. But none argued again. 3 days later, Theon rode from Winterfell with 6 men beside him. Maester Luwin gave him a sealed scroll, an offer of peace, a call for the Ironborn to leave the North in exchange for control over certain ports and salt rights. It was a clever bribe, one Robb knew Balon might consider. Theon tucked it into his coat, close to his heart, and said nothing as he rode. The journey was slow and brutal. The roads were thick with snow, villages burned and abandoned. The Ironborn had left their mark fields salted, homes gutted, corpses frozen into statues of terror. Theon saw children dead in the snow and women hanged from trees. Every sight cut deeper than the last dot. His men watched him, always watching, unsure whether he grieved or schemed. But Theon was silent. He did not cry. He did not swear vengeance. He just rode forward. When they reached the western cliffs, the sea wind hit him like a slap. The scent of salt and rot filled his lungs, familiar, unwelcome. And then he saw the towers of Pike rising from the jagged rocks like broken teeth, each wave crashing below like the roar of ghosts. He stood before his father again after 10 years, in a hall that smelled of fish and damp stone. Balon Greyjoy hadn't changed. His beard was longer, his voice rougher, but the contempt in his eyes remained the same. He did not rise to greet his son. So, Balon said. The prodigal squid returns. Theon said nothing. He stepped forward and placed the scroll on the table between them. I come as envoy of King Robb Stark, he said. To offer peace, Balon scoffed. Peace? With the boy who holds my son in chains? Theon met his gaze. I was never his prisoner. Not truly. And I come now to prevent more Greyjoys from dying for a war you can't win. You've grown. Soft, Balon sneered, wearing wolfskin instead of salt. You were supposed to be my heir, and now you're a lapdog begging for mercy. I'm trying to keep your people alive, Theon snapped, louder than intended. I've seen what your raids leave behind. Frozen children, broken homes. You're not building a kingdom. You're burning the world just to say you're king. Of the ashes, Balon stood. For a moment, Theon thought he might strike him. But instead, he simply laughed. You sound like a Stark. Theon's voice dropped. Maybe I'm something else now. Maybe I've seen what real power is, what real kingship means. You still think war is glory, but you'll drown our house, trying to prove it. Asha stood to the side, arms crossed, watching him quietly. No smirk on her lips now, just something unreadable in her eyes. Balon opened the scroll. Read it in silence, then tore it in half. I will not kneel to a green boy in the snow, he said. And if you think wearing his colors protects you here, you're wrong. Theon's jaw tightened. Then I'll go back, and I'll tell Robb you spat in his face. But know this, Father, this war will not make you king. It will make you a grave. And he turned to leave, footsteps echoing behind him like thunder in the storm. The sea winds tore at Theon's cloak as he rode from Pike with his escort, the horses kicking up dirt and salt. No farewell, no words from his father, just silence. Asha hadn't even looked at him as he left. There had been something in her. Eyes, though, confusion, maybe even respect. But neither of them had spoken. Maybe they both knew there was nothing left to say. As the cliffs faded behind them, and the wide frozen lands of the north opened ahead, Theon felt the weight settle on his shoulders again. Not just the failure of the peace offer, but the certainty that now he had no home left at all. His father had made it clear. You are not one of us, and Robb. He was a king now. A king who had gambled on mercy and was losing the North Peace by peace. The ride back to Winterfell was harsher. The snows had deepened, and the Ironborn had pushed further inland. More villages razed. More trees bearing corpses. Each mile felt like proof of Theon's failure. When they reached the gates of Winterfell, the guards let them in, but the coldness in their eyes was sharper than the wind. Theon was taken straight to Robb's war tent, where the king stood hunched. Over a map, his mother at his side. He said no. Theon said before anyone asked. Robb didn't look up right away. Just pressed his hand against the table, as if the weight of the north was bearing down on his bones. And he sent no message? Catelyn asked, arms crossed tightly. He tore the scroll, Theon said, laughed in my face, called Robb a green boy in the snow. He's not wrong, Lord Karstark muttered from the corner. Catelyn shot him a sharp look, but Robb spoke. Over them both. Did he say anything about his next move? He's not going to stop. He's convinced he can choke the coast and starve us from the west. Robb finally looked up, eyes dark, tired. And what do you think, Theon? Was it a waste to send you? Theon hesitated. No, he said, because now you know what he is. He won't stop unless you stop him. Good, Robb said flatly. Because I plan to. The next morning, the northern forces began to mobilize. Robb would ride west with the majority of his bannermen, striking back at the Ironborn, not just to reclaim the coast, but to send a message. The North remembers. And it would not forgive, but behind closed doors, doubt was spreading. The lords began to grumble louder now. The king sent a Greyjoy to treat with Greyjoys. What did he expect? Theon's been allowed to move freely, while our sons lie dead in burnt fields. Was this a war or a family reunion? Even trusted allies began to drift. Lord Glover, whose kin had died at Deepwood Motte, refused to speak in council. The Manderleys sent no fresh men to the front, and Roose Bolton. Roose stayed quiet, watching like a spider waiting for the web to shake. Catelyn warned Robb one night as they walked through the quiet halls of Winterfell. You can't keep defending him. Robb, not now. Your bannermen don't trust him. And if they don't trust you because of him, He went back to Pike for me, Robb said. He risked his life. That means something. Not to them, she said. They see a man who failed, who was born on the wrong shore. I see a man trying to be better, Robb whispered. And if that's not worth something, then maybe we're no better than the ones we're fighting. Elsewhere in the castle, Theon sat alone in a small room. He hadn't been assigned, he'd just chosen it. No guards, no chains, but the freedom tasted like sand. He knew what people thought, heard the whispers, felt the stares. He hadn't betrayed Robb, but he hadn't saved him either. And worst of all, he'd seen what his people were doing to the north. That could never be forgotten. He sat there, fingers pressed together, when the door creaked open. And someone stepped in. It was a Rya. Except not the little girl he remembered. Her face was cold and unreadable, her eyes older than her years. She looked at him for a long moment and said, "If you ever touch my brother, I'll kill you in your sleep." Then she left. Theon didn't reply. He didn't even look angry. Just empty. That night, as the campfires burned outside the walls and war drums echoed faintly from the west, Theon stood on the ramparts of Winterfell and stared into the night. His fingers gripped the stone edge tightly. He didn't belong in the north. He didn't belong in Pike, and he no longer knew where that left him. But one thing had become clear. He could no longer run from who he was. He would have to choose. The sun never quite rose that morning. Thick clouds blanketed the sky, and Winterfell sat in silence beneath a soft, steady snowfall. Robb Stark had already left days earlier, riding west with his forces to crush the Ironborn. The castle, once full of life, felt hollow now, its walls colder, its shadows deeper. Theon remained behind, not out of cowardice, but because Robb had asked him to stay. "I need someone I can trust here," Robb had said before leaving. "Someone who knows the ways of war and the tricks the Ironborn might use." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Theon had smiled, but there was no joy in it. Now every footstep he took inside Winterfell echoed louder than it should. The courtyard had emptied. Most of the Stark bannermen were on the march. The castle was held by a skeleton force stewards, old soldiers, women, and children. The kind of vulnerability Theon had once dreamt of exploiting. But that dream was dead. He walked the familiar paths, past the old blacksmith's forge, past the kennels, and into the godswood. The heart tree stood there, its pale bark dusted with snow, its red eyes watching. He stood in front of it a long time, unsure what to say. "Do you hate me too?" he asked quietly. "Or are you just waiting for me to pick a side?" The tree didn't answer. It never had. Behind him, someone approached. He didn't turn. It was Mr. Luwine. "You should speak more often," the old man said, "even when no one is listening." "I've had enough words," Theon muttered. "They don't mean much anymore." "Perhaps," Luwine said, "but silence can be just as dangerous." Theon finally looked at him. "I should have never left for Pike. I should have known how it would end. You did what Robb asked of you. You showed him your loyalty." "And what did it buy me?" Theon asked, voice low. "Place in a castle full of ghosts? A name no one trusts? It bought you your soul back, Lewin said softly, but Theon didn't answer. He just looked at the weirwood again, as if searching for something that might never come. That same evening, trouble came riding through the gates. It was 2 scouts, bloodied, shaken. Their horses were lathered in sweat. They brought grim news. The Ironborn weren't just raiding anymore. They were coming inland in force led by Greyjoy, Balon's brother. He had returned from exile, commanding black-sailed ships and men more savage than anything seen before. And worse, he wasn't striking along the coast. He was marching straight toward Winterfell. He's mad, one scout said, eyes wide with fear. He doesn't fight for salt or land. He fights because he enjoys the screams. The castle stirred into chaos. Doors were barred, weapons gathered. The few able-bodied men remaining were assembled. But it was clear to all, Winterfell could not hold if the Ironborn truly came, and Theon knew it. That night, he sat alone in the great hall, staring into the fire. The warmth did little to ease the cold in his chest. He thought of Pike, its gray stone, its endless storms. He thought of the Iron Islands, where he had never been more than a second son to a bitter king. He thought of the boys he'd grown up with, the ones who now marched to war. And he thought of Robb, a boy who'd chosen mercy over pride, a king who had trusted a Greyjoy. At midnight, Theon went to Maester Lewin's chambers. "I need a raven," he said. "To whom?" Lewin asked. "Robb," Theon said. "He needs to know what's coming. Euron, the Ironborn. He has to return before." "It's too late. And what will you do?" Lewin asked. Theon didn't answer immediately. Then slowly he said, "I'll stay. I'll fight." "You'll die," Lewin warned. Theon gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe. But if I'm going to die, I'd rather do it for something that matters." The raven flew out before the sun broke, and when the first horns sounded across the icy fields, warning of riders in the distance, Theon Greyjoy stood atop the walls of Winterfell, not as a prince of the Iron Islands, but as a man who had finally chosen a side, even if it was too late. The snowstorm that morning came like a shroud, covering the landscape in white, so thick it blurred the line between land and sky. But even through the blinding cold, they saw the black sails. Euron Greyjoy had come. The Ironborn attacked just after dawn. No warning, no hesitation. Screaming war chants, they surged toward Winterfell with axes raised and fire trailing behind them. Theon stood on the battlements, eyes narrowed against the wind, watching them charge. He could see their bloodlust even from here. These weren't raiders. They were reavers, zealots to the drowned god, bent on destruction. And at their front was Euron himself, tall, wild-eyed, wearing a patch over one eye and a grin that looked carved from madness. He rode not just to conquer, but to consume. Winterfell's defenders were few, no more than 80 trained men left behind when Robb had marched west. The rest were old soldiers, stable hands, and frightened boys with swords too big for their arms. The gate shuddered under the first blow. Then the second. Theon turned to the men behind him. "Hold them at the gate as long as you can. No retreat. If we fall here." A grizzled archer, missing part of his ear, spat into the snow and said, "You're barking orders now, Greyjoy." "I am," Theon said, "because if we don't stop them, they'll burn everything and hang what's left." He met the man's eyes. No pride, no arrogance, just a quiet fire. The archer nodded. "Then let's make him bleed." Theon moved quickly. He knew how the Ironborn fought: chaotic, overwhelming. But they relied on speed and fear. If Winterfell's defenders could break their first wave, even for a moment, it might throw them off balance. He had them pour hot oil along the walls, set traps in the snow, narrow the gates with wagons. Every moment they delayed was one more chance for a raven to reach Robb. The gate finally gave in with a thunderous crack. Ironborn stormed into the courtyard with axes flashing, screaming their salt chants, and Winterfell met them with fire. Oil was lit from above, engulfing the first line of attackers. Archers rained arrows from the towers. The defenders fought like men possessed, not for glory, but for survival. Theon was in the thick of it, sword in hand, slashing and parrying. Bleeding from a cut along his ribs, he recognized many of the men he was killing. They were from Pike. Some had even trained beside him. But now they didn't look like men. They looked like monsters. Euron pushed through with the second wave, his axe cleaving through a Winterfell guard like paper. He was a storm in human form, laughing as he cut, shouting riddles soaked in blood. Theon met him near the well. They stared at each other through the haze of smoke and snow. "Nephew," Euron said, voice light as silk. "Didn't expect to find you guarding a Stark kennel." "You shouldn't have come," Theon said, blood dripping from his sword. "I came to bring you home." Euron smiled. "To remind you who you are." "I know who I am," Theon growled. "Do you?" Euron asked, stepping closer. "A dog raised by wolves. A prince who couldn't even bend a knee to his own father." "You don't belong here? You never did." Theon didn't answer. He struck first. The fight was fast and brutal. Euron was stronger, faster and wilder. But Theon knew these grounds. He moved between rubble and snowbanks, dodging, drawing Euron in. They clashed again, steel on steel. Theon's blade grazed Euron's arm. Euron's axe slammed into Theon's shoulder, cracking bone. Theon fell to one knee. Blood filled his mouth. Euron raised the axe for the final blow, grinning, when a horn blew in the distance. The gates behind them burst open again. But it wasn't Ironborn Dot. It was the direwolf banners of House Stark. Robb had returned. He'd ridden hard, through snow and darkness, the moment he'd read Theon's raven. His men flooded into Winterfell, roaring like thunder. Euron's grin faded. He looked at Theon once more, disappointed, as if a toy had broken. Then he turned and vanished into the chaos. The Ironborn scattered. Some died fighting. Others fled into the snow. Robb's men cut them down in the yard and against the walls. Winterfell, though bloodied, still stood Dot, and at its center, bleeding, broken, and barely breathing, stood Theon Greyjoy. When Robb dismounted and rushed to his side, Theon didn't speak. Right away, he just looked up, eyes filled with something heavy relief, maybe even peace. "You came back," he whispered. "I always come back," Robb said. Theon laughed, weakly. "You stupid wolf." And then he collapsed. The raven arrived before the sun rose again, black wings slicing through the cold air like a final omen. It bore no seal, no ribbon, just a torn scrap of cloth soaked in blood. The sigil of House Greyjoy, smeared and shredded. A message from Euron. No words, just a threat. He had vanished into the snow, but he wasn't finished. Robb stared at the cloth in his tent as a healer worked silently in the background. Theon lay on a cot nearby, his chest rising and falling, in slow, painful rhythm. He hadn't regained consciousness since the battle, and the Maester wasn't sure he would. He lost a lot of blood, the old man said, dabbing a cloth along the broken flesh of Theon's shoulder. Even if he lives, he may never be whole. Robb didn't answer. He just sat there, hands clenched, watching his friend's pale face. Catelyn entered quietly, her face lined with exhaustion. She looked at Theon for a long time before saying, "You should prepare for what comes next." "I know," Robb said. "The Ironborn will return." "No," she said, eyes sharp. "I mean your bannermen. The ones who already think you've gone too far for a man who should have been hanged years ago." Robb turned to her. He saved Winterfell. Most of them will only remember that it was nearly lost because you trusted him to begin with. The truth hung between them like smoke. Downstairs in the great hall, the survivors of the battle were being fed. The castle reeked of smoke and blood. Every face was marked by what they'd seen, some stunned, some grieving, others just waiting. For orders, Theon's survival meant different things to each of them. To some, it was weakness. To others, it was a miracle. But none of them could deny it. When the Ironborn came, it was a Greyjoy who stood at the gate. 2 days passed before. Theon woke Dot. It was still snowing outside, soft and constant. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, and he winced from the pain. "You should be dead," came Robb's voice from the corner. Theon smiled faintly. "I tried." They sat in silence a while. "I meant what I said," Robb added. "You saved this castle. You bought us time. You kept them from breaking through before we arrived." Theon coughed, pain stretching across his chest. "Doesn't mean your men will forgive me." "No," Robb said. "They probably won't. You?" Robb looked away for a moment. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. But I know what you did, and I'll never forget it." Later that evening, Robb called a gathering in the main hall. Every man and woman who could stand was present. Lords, soldiers, servants, even children. Theon was brought in on a stretcher, barely able to sit upright. Robb stood at the front, voice steady. "Many of you doubt the man before you. I understand that. He was born Ironborn. He fought beside us and went back to his family. Some of you never trusted him again." He paused. "When Euron Greyjoy brought war to our gates, Theon stood and fought, not for Pike, not for a drowned god, but for Winterfell, for all of you." There were murmurs, some still skeptical, some silent in guilt. Robb stepped forward. "He is not my prisoner, not anymore. He is not your enemy. He is not even your guest." Then, loud and clear, "From this day Theon of House Greyjoy shall be known as Theon Stark of Winterfell, by right of loyalty, by blood of the old gods, and by the trust of his king." Gasps spread through the crowd. Theon looked up sharply, his mouth slightly open. "What?" Robb met his gaze. "You earned it." The next days were filled with unrest, arguments, even threats behind closed doors. Lords raged that Robb had crossed a line. A few threatened to break their oaths, but others remained silent because they had seen the fire. They had seen the blood, and they had seen Theon on the walls, bleeding beside them, not above them. Euron would return eventually. They all knew that. The war wasn't over, but when he did, he wouldn't be facing a castle divided. He'd be facing the north, and somewhere within that cold and battered fortress, a man who had been a ghost all his life began to feel something he had never known. Not power, not legacy, but belonging. He was Theon Stark now, and the North would remember.